Hi, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Hope you're having a great week so far, and hope you're doing well. So as always, please go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. This really helps out the channel as it gets these videos out to a wider audience. So with all that out of the way, let's just get right into it and see what we got today, guys. We are live.
You understand our pandemic wasn't the same as the world pandemic. Because they're going to come home and they're going to have questions and we're going to have to tell them the truth. Because they're going to come home and be like, Grandpa, I read in my history book that you were alive during the Great Pandemic. Is that true? And we're going to be like, yeah, damn right I was. I'm a survivor. Oh my God, Grandpa. You survived the Great Pandemic? How? Look, I read in my history book right now. Look, during the Great Pandemic, millions of people died around the world. Millions of people died. That must have been awful, Grandpa. Did you lose a lot of friends? Oh! Not even one. No, not even one. You see, Grandpa was under the age of 65 and in good health. Did you catch it, Grandpa? Oh, like 2 or 3 times. Did you isolate the first 2 times? And then that fucking Trudeau stopped paying the bill. And we're going to be old and angry and we're not going to remember. They're going to be like, who's Trudeau, Grandpa? We're going to be like, I think he was the first black prime minister. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was a pretty fucking stupid time, you know.
Worst thing on the planet. Thousands and thousands of people have been vaccine damaged. It's all coming out now.
It's called COVID, C-O-N-VID, COVID.
Foreigners of the world, the survey, it was anonymous, 18 to 84, all of them said that the white clotting and coagulation in the veins was synonymous with the death of that person. Yes, it was all a scam. The whole thing
Tell
was
us
a
more,
scam.
tell us what kind.
Bollocks. Gene therapy, clot shot, genocide, murder.
Thank you.
Reducing the population.
Rubbish. It doesn't protect you. It doesn't do anything. And there's a lot of sudden deaths suddenly.
I wouldn't touch it again. I've listened to microbiologists and epidemiologists. It's not safe.
I'm going to sue them. I was unwell post-COVID vaccines for sure. My husband that was very fit and healthy had a heart attack. My sister-in-law is a biochemist. She didn't want to have the vaccines. She ended up taking one vaccine, but as a very educated biochemist, she didn't want it. None of us wanted it. I only had the vaccine because I wanted to travel to see my children and my grandchildren. Otherwise, I would never have put that poison in my body. Bill Gates has a lot to answer for.
Yeah, he sure fucking does, and that's just the way it is.
Bombshell new study from Yale Medical School finds people suffering from long COVID are actually suffering from mRNA vaccine injury. As if that's bad enough, it's worse than that. These people are suffering from what's called vaccine-induced AIDS. It's called VAIDS. This is from Slay News. Leading scientists from the world-renowned Yale University have confirmed that COVID mRNA vaccines cause vaccine-acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, VAIDS. A bombshell study conducted by researchers at Yale University School of Medicine found that mRNA injections alter human biology to create long-term spike protein production that increases over time. The scientists warned that the COVID mRNA vaccines alter T-cell immunophenotypes, which triggers VAIDS. The study was led by Bornali Bhattacharya. So not only were we collectively forced to take an experimental vaccine or risk losing our jobs, we were lied to about it. It didn't stop you from contracting or transmitting the virus. It wasn't safe. It caused heart issues, blood clots, autoimmune disorders. We were censored when we questioned the madness. And now we find out that the mRNA jab causes VAIDS in many people. This is one of the most egregious scandals in American history. Kash Patel's first order of business at the FBI should be throwing in prison every single person involved in this crime against humanity.
Should have been. Still waiting. Should have been.
I heard this from my colleague, Dr. Carrie Made, who's been in touch with fertility clinics. They've never seen anything like it. The sperm of inoculated men does not swim. The eggs of inoculated women do not grow into embryos, and those that do have a huge amount of contamination with stuff that's non-organic. What's going on here? We also know that according to the first New England Journal of Medicine study saying that Pfizer was safe and effective, this was in June of 2021. If you look at the raw data, it proves that 80% of the women who get the shot in the first and second trimester, basically 0 to 20 weeks, have an 80% miscarriage rate. Now, the miscarriage rate, just baseline, is 1 in 6. It's now 7 to 8 times that much. Dr. James Thorpe points out that there's a 79% increase in fetal malformations. There are unprecedented numbers of stillbirths. But again, this stuff becomes so censored that the mainstream says, oh, no, that's a lie. You're making that up. We also just published My Cycle Story with many scientists, including Dr. Hooker here, where we had a database of over 6,000 women that came forward because their voices were being silenced. We had a group of about 20,000 women on Facebook who were talking about their experience with their menstrual cycle. They'd never seen anything like it. 90-year-olds beginning bleeding again. And we're not talking mild bleeding. We're talking clotting. I had women calling me who had been passing clots for weeks and weeks. We have 2 VAERS cases of little girls, 18-month-old girls, who hemorrhaged and died. In My Cycle Story, so we had over 6,000 women. Then we looked at the baseline rate of what's called a decidual cast shedding, passing a decidual cast. That is where the entire inside of the uterus just is shed all at once as a piece. It looks just like a plaster cast of the inside of the uterus. In our data, as I recall, it was like 269 women reported this. Most of our original database were women who hadn't even had the shot. It's doing something to the coagulation pathways in the body. That is just the tip of the iceberg. I keep thinking, when these young women realize they will never be able to get pregnant because they had that shot, I mean, the horror of it is unimaginable.
Yeah. There needs to be accountability. 100%.
And I'm going to go with Stefan Bancel. Let's talk about vaccine development, because we've heard how it happened, obviously, with COVID-19 starting from 2022, and how extraordinary the process was also in terms of the speed. How is development, adoption, and scaling of vaccine going on when it comes for different variants and subvariants? Because this is one of the big concerns as we're all here now, and we're discussing, we understand the context, and this is a great deal.
Sure. Well, good morning, and thank you for having me on the panel. So the great news versus 2020, where we are today, is we have manufacturing capacity. As Seth knows, when the pandemic happened, Moderna had made 100,000 doses in 2019 for the whole year. And I remember walking after Davos into the office of my head of manufacturing, and I say, how will we make 1 billion doses next year? And he looked at me a bit funny, say, what? I say, yeah, we need to make 1 billion doses next year. There's going to be a pandemic.
Right out of the horse's mouth.
So beginning in 2002, Anthony Fauci got a 68% raise from the Pentagon for doing bioweapons development. Wow. And he got a raise of billions of dollars a year to do it. And then he started that's when they started doing all this gain of function. And then in 2014, 3 of those bugs escaped. Everybody was angry these bugs escaped, and 300 scientists, top scientists, sent letters to Obama saying, you got to shut down Anthony Fauci because he's going to create a pandemic. And so Obama ordered a moratorium. And at that time, Fauci had 18 different gain-of-function experiments he was doing around the United States. But Obama ordered him to shut them all down, but he didn't. He instead moved his stuff offshore to Wuhan, where he could do it out of sight
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a scientist. I have spent decades learning science and math, statistics, everything from quantum mechanics all the way to environmental science, biogeochemistry. I'm interdisciplinary. I was a tenured full professor at the University of Ottawa, and I always spoke my mind, and that got me fired. This was before COVID, so I knew what it was like to fight the establishment. And when I heard the COVID propaganda, I knew immediately that it was intense propaganda and that it couldn't possibly be true because they were yelling that we were all going to die and I couldn't see any dead bodies out in the street. And I did. I went out in the street and I looked around. I couldn't see any dead people, no matter what they said. And as a scientist, what I decided to do was to look at all-cause mortality data. So our nations collect very good data about the number of deaths. That's something you cannot be biased about. The person either died or they didn't. You know that they died, you know their age, you know where they died, and you collect that data. Countries collect very good data about deaths and births. So that is unbiased, hard data. We can analyze the number of deaths as a function of time, by age group, by sex, and by region, by jurisdiction, by province, state, down to municipalities and so on. And that is the data that I've been using since the very beginning of this so-called pandemic. And my research group, we were the first to say, back in an article that was published in June of 2020, that when we look at all-cause mortality data, there is no pandemic. There was a peak of deaths at the beginning in certain hotspots that was directly due to how people were treated in hospitals and care homes. It was quantitatively due to that. There is no, so I can tell you, after 3 years of intense study that we are continuing, I can tell you the following thing. And this is hard scientific conclusions from looking at the data. There was no pandemic. There was no particularly virulent pathogen whatsoever. There's no evidence for it. There is nothing that is spreading that causes death. The mortality doesn't cross borders. The virus has a passport. It refuses to cross borders. You can make a map of Europe. You can see countries where there's absolutely no excess all-cause mortality, right beside hotspots where there's intense all-cause mortality. So those are firm conclusions from I have written more than 30 scientific reports about all-cause mortality and COVID-related science, and I can tell you these things with certainty. So when Eva says there's no global warming, I also study global warming. I did the calculations, the radiation transfer. I can tell you Eva's right. As a scientist, I can tell you there's no global warming, there was no pandemic, nothing is spreading, nitrogen is not a problem, cow farts are not a problem. I can tell you these things with certainty. I'm not joking. I'm a scientist. The article about radiation transfer and so-called global warming that I wrote in 2010, parts of it were read in the U.S. Senate. It was very impactful. Scientists have said this is rigorous, this is hard. What I showed in that calculation was you can double the amount of CO2 and it will not have a noticeable effect on the Earth's mean surface temperature, period. That's a hard calculation. So I've been doing this for many years. Every time there is a problem in society where science can be of some help, I get right in there and I do it. And so we have done this for COVID. We were the first to establish the points that I just told you about, and then we moved on to the vaccines. And what we found was that the vaccines are a toxic substance. They should be interpreted and thought of as a toxic substance that they inject into your arm. The best way to understand the effect of the vaccine is to study toxicology. So we showed that as soon as a booster is rolled out to a particular age group, very rapidly, within weeks, immediately there follows a peak in all-cause mortality. And we see this repeatedly in country after country. We have studied more than 100 countries now, and the vaccines are clearly temporally associated with peaks in all-cause mortality. And we're able to calculate the toxicity of that vaccine, and we find that the risk of dying per injection increases with age, and it increases exponentially with age, and your risk of dying per injection doubles every 4 or 5 years of age. We were the first to demonstrate that. We have demonstrated it repeatedly for many countries, Australia, Israel, Peru, many countries. And so in this study, one of the things we found, and this should convince anybody, the following thing. We can quantify excess mortality, whether or not there's mortality beyond the historic trend, as a function of time. And what we find is that in more than half of the countries around the world, there is absolutely no excess mortality in the entire period from the time the pandemic was declared in March of 2020 all the way to until mortality starts to increase when the vaccines are rolled out. In more than half the countries in the world, there is no excess mortality until the vaccines are rolled out. And then there is a significant shift to a domain of higher mortality. And this is clear in the data itself. And the countries that do have excess mortality before you roll out the vaccines, it can be directly associated to how people were being assaulted. And there are many ways in different jurisdictions that people were assaulted. Some of the assaults were very vicious. Like in Peru, they actually called in 10,000 military reservists to go and test people in their homes, in the villages, everywhere, and pull them out and isolate them if they tested positive. They actually had a huge peak of mortality related to that policy. So when you assault people by refusing to treat them, in the U.S. they refused to treat poor people for bacterial pneumonia by not prescribing antibiotics. This was a huge problem, a big killer in the U.S., and it created a peak of all-cause mortality in the summer, which is unheard of. Normally, mortality is lower in the summer. So we just kept seeing these features, and we kept explaining them quantitatively in terms of how populations were assaulted. So this was a mega campaign. Obviously, you know, it was planned by the CIA, the military. It was executed. They were going to do it no matter what. And it killed people by how they treated people. And then the vaccines themselves are toxic. So the experiment's been done globally. We know this now. We know that death increases exponentially with age. Many elderly people died. It's hard to complain because they were elderly, but still, they died. So just to give you one quantitative figure to leave you with, in most countries, people over 80, the risk of dying per injection is 1 death in between 5 and 20 injections, depending on the country. That's the level of toxicity of the vaccine for elderly people. And this is not to mention all the serious harms that are done to young people and young adults, including myocarditis, heart conditions, you name it. So this has been the nature of our scientific work. We're continuing this full time. We'll be publishing papers in the coming months that are even more revolutionary, I would say. And so we're not going to stop, and we're embarrassing the establishment scientists who are not doing this work and who are lying through their teeth and who are part of the propaganda industry. That's our job. Thanks.
Thank you, dear.
Yeah, well said. I know it was a little long, but there's a lot of information that needed to be exposed there. It's just, there's so much to this nut.
As a doctor, I have never seen something so injurious to the human body. It invades the brain. It invades the heart. It causes brain and heart damage. It invades the bone marrow. It stimulates antibodies to actually start to attack our own platelets and our other cells in our body. It causes blood clotting and damage to blood vessels like we've never seen. Data from University of Pittsburgh suggesting it causes cancer. Since when do we have a protein that actually injures the brain, injures the heart, the bone marrow, the immune system, causes blood clotting, and potentially causes cancer in a single protein? It's a weapon. In fact, there are 3 papers, one by Farkas, published in Military Medicine, and 2 by Yen, published in preprint. They've actually concluded it is a bioweapon. It is a bioweapon. According to strict military criteria, it's a bioweapon.
And I couldn't imagine having took that and how tripped out you must be right now.
Talk about bioweapons. The level, I know a lot now about bioweapons because I've been doing a book on it for the past 2.5 years, and you know, the technology that we now have to develop these microbes, we've put hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there's an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are because of the structure of the genetic structure, genetic differentials among different races of the receptors of the ACE2 receptor. COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. But we don't know whether it was deliberately targeted that or not. But there are papers out there that show the racial and ethnic differential impact to that. We do know that the Chinese are spending hundreds of millions of dollars developing ethnic bioweapons, and we are developing ethnic bioweapons. That's what all those labs in the Ukraine are about. They're collecting Russian DNA, they're collecting Chinese DNA, so that we can target people.
Take from that what you will. Just thought I'd throw that in there.
The House released a 500-page report on COVID-19 pandemic. Key findings: COVID-19 likely originated from a lab-related incident in Wuhan, China. Crazy. You get banned from YouTube for saying that. Banned. Okay, over $200 billion in relief funds lost to fraud, with criminals exploiting weak oversight. Prolonged lockdowns and arbitrary mandates cause severe harm, economic devastation, mental health crises, and historic learning loss, while lacking robust scientific support. Policies ignored natural immunity, pushing mandates that eroded trust and harmed public perception of science. Absolutely. WHO and CDC compromised by political interference, offering inconsistent, unscientific guidance that fueled public distrust. And the key players included federal agencies, and Cuomo's administration actively obstructed oversight efforts and hid critical evidence.
Christ.
Select subcommittee on coronavirus pandemic basically said all the conspiracy theorists were correct. Every single one of them. No repercussions, no retractions, no apology from Rachel Maddow. None of it.
Yeah, exactly right. Not a single person has been held accountable for what happened during that. Now, I feel like a lot of people have forgotten about it or just want to forget about it because it was such an awful time. But there's so much that hasn't been addressed yet, and just how much damage was actually done, it's not even funny. Just my own personal experiences. My wife's uncle took that shot. Within 6 weeks, he was dead, and he knew it was that shot. He even told us. Hyper cancer just got him, and it took his life. My sister had a friend, took that shot, brain cancer, hyper brain cancer, came on so fast it was ridiculous. And there's so many people that have told me stories just like this, how that vaccine just messed people up. And then there's people who are tripping because they were told I had to take the shot, like I had no choice, I had to take it for work. There's so many people. But luckily there are detox methods that I've read about online. Personally, I didn't take the shot, so I didn't have to worry about any of that. But if I did, you best believe I'd be trying them all. It's just something that you got to take care of. And I can't imagine being one of those people who were coerced into taking it, and now they have something wrong with them, and they don't want to acknowledge what it might be. Because, again, with my own personal experiences, my grandmother, who happens to be a CNN, CBC junkie, who just sits in front of this propaganda machine all fucking day, she has probably taken 6 squirts of the goofy juice already. She has so much wrong with her. She keeps going to the doctor, and they keep telling her, we don't know what's wrong with you. Well, we all know what's wrong with her. My mother is a daycare worker. She was forced to take the vaccine. Even she has some kind of lump on her spine that they don't know what it is. Imagine that. My father, he has stomach issues now. They're pretty sure he's got some kind of stomach cancer. He's too stubborn to go to the doctor now, but he wasn't too stubborn to go take the fucking shot. And there's just so many such cases. And that's just the vaccine. That's not even considering what was done to the children. My own child, who is severely autistic, who really could use some peers and social development, was taken from him. For 2 years, he wasn't allowed to interact with anybody. That has permanently stifled his development in such a big way. And there's a lot of children that this affected in that same way. And that's not even to mention the teenagers, where their social lives were so important. A lot of them took their own lives because they couldn't deal with it. And I could go on and on and on and on. I'm sure a lot of you guys could too. But the fact of the matter is it was so unpleasant and such an awful time in our history that a lot of people want to just be done with it. And they want to just move on, let it be over. I can't do that. There needs to be accountability, okay? So much of where we are right now, politically and in the world, where we're so divided, there's just so much of it too, largely stems from this world event. And I challenge anybody to tell me I'm wrong about that. This all started when that fucking virus was announced. All of it. And in a way it was good because it woke a lot of people up, but in a way it was bad because a lot of people are more brainwashed than ever. But anyways, that's all I got today, guys. I want to know how you feel about this, and I want to hear your comments. So drop them below, and let's get into it. And I will see you again in the next one. But until then, 80 Canadian, signing off.